Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan, thank you so much for being here with us at the Cipher Brief. It's a pleasure to see you.
Well, it's great to be with you again, Suzanne. Always a pleasure to talk on the Cipher Brief.
I feel like we've had some iterations of this conversation multiple times in the past, but we're in a particularly difficult time, it seems, right now in the Middle East in terms of potential escalation, pushing maybe closer to a broader war than the one that's already happening between Israel and Hamas right now, given the back and forth and the recent attacks, the recent Israeli attacks, both in Beirut and in Tehran itself. I'm just interested, based on your experience, you have so much experience in the region and with these players, to get your perspective on where we are today and just how dangerous of a situation we might be in.
Well, Suzanne, I don't want to overplay it, but I think we're in a very tenuous situation. What we used to describe as red lines don't really exist anymore because on both sides they've kind of been crossed over. And where that's left us here is in a place where if you attack, if there's one attack, there's going to be a retaliation, and then that retaliation comes, and that begets another retaliation, and that's where you end up having this escalation that everyone says they don't want, but can be a natural fallout if we're not careful. It could be a road to some greater conflict, if not a war in the region. Certainly extended, continued conflict that's beyond the boundaries, as we've already seen of Gaza, and that's the problem. And I don't think there's a crystal ball out there that tells us clearly how this is going to end.
Yeah. If only there were. Let's talk a little bit about some of the equipment that you're seeing moved into the region by the U.S., which clearly is being put into place as a type of deterrent from further attacks against Israel. How are you looking at the numbers and types of equipment that's being moved in there and what that might signal in terms of the U.S.'s showing of strength in this situation?
Well, I would look at it first. If we talk about why it's going there, that's important, I think, and then we'll talk about what's there, and that'll kind of line up. But if you think about it from the United States standpoint, we absolutely want to deter this conflict from spreading more, right? From continuing, from it escalating to anything bad. So deterring Iran from expanding this conflict or playing a role in expanding the conflict broader into the region is number one. I think it maybe tied with that is making sure our U.S. troops are protected, right? So absolutely, we have a fair number of troops in the region. Depending on you count, it's between 35 and 40,000 troops that are always in the region in some shape or form. And protecting our own soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in the region is super important. We don't want another Jordan to happen. We don't want to lose any of our soldiers. And, we've had this strike on the base in Iraq. So protecting our troops is one of the other reasons we want to make sure we have the right forces to do that. And then the third reason is, and it's been made public through the State Department and through the administration, to say that we're there to help defend Israel against what's going to appear to be an impending attack of some kind from Iran. So those are the three kind of reasons I look at as why we are ensuring we have the right forces in place in the region. And then in terms of what's going there, there's been a focus on the maritime in terms of the maritime forces that are there, and that's rightly so, right? Maritime and air forces can get to a region and have this inherent maneuver capability, right? So they don't have to always be there, but they can get there relatively quickly. And as you know, there's already a pretty robust presence in the Middle East that extends, or in this region, from Gaza all the way through to the Gulf. So you have, as you know, an amphibious strike group in the Mediterranean, plus ballistic missile and other surface ships that can help defend against an attack on Israel there. And then when you get to the Red Sea, we're there trying to do our best in the sea lanes, but we have forces there that can intercept anything that's coming from Iran or from that direction towards Israel. And then over more in the Gulf, we have carrier strike group assets and more ships. And most recently, Secretary Austin has mentioned that the Abraham Lincoln's going to come from the Pacific to relieve the Roosevelt carrier strike group. So that carrier strike group could be two there at the same time for some period of time. And then he also announced that we would be bringing another squadron of airplanes, likely F-22s or something of that nature, that'll come into the region, again, to help defend and protect and deter. And so if you're Iran looking out the window, you're looking at quite an array set up to catch, help the Israeli deflect, defend anything that comes in their direction. And don't think those forces are just sitting there in one place. For instance, the airplanes on the aircraft carrier likely have moved somewhere ashore to best. Some of them probably moved ashore to be positioned in the right place before the Air Force airplanes can come. In other words, it's all a coordinated joint effort to be best postured to do those three things I talked about: deter Iran, protect our own troops, and defend Israel against an attack.
Yeah, I would imagine there's quite a bit of scenario planning constantly going on in the Pentagon in situations like this around the world, and that there have been scenarios kind of planned out about what Iran's response to these two killings, particularly the one in Tehran, might be. So, if you don't mind, I mean, I don't want to walk down a path of speculation, but I would like to kind of open the window a little bit for people who don't do this every day to understand what a range of possibilities might include when it comes to Iran responding as they promised they will.
Well, you hear this term axis of resistance, or, some way to talk about Iran as not just being Iran, because it has proxies and surrogates in the region that can also use their capabilities and bring those to bear. So it's important to talk about who they are and where they're postured. It's also important to look back to last time that Iran did this attack on Israel. Remember, it was mostly missiles and drones, very conventional. They launched a lot between Israel and the United States and some allies like Jordan and the rest. Most of those missiles were intercepted, and they did little damage in Israel. If you're Iran and you're looking at that, that's not the outcome they would want this time, right? They don't want to look like they're not capable of responding to in their words, the great Satan, which is the United States and Israel and all that the West stands for. So the way that I would look at this and what Iran has in terms of options, they still have the missiles, ballistic missiles that can reach Israel, and they still have drones that can reach Israel. So those are expected to be brought to bear, but they also have their surrogates, which weren't so much tied into the last attack, right? We've heard a lot about the Houthis that are in Yemen, right, being in some ways supported completely by Iran and likely do some of Iran's business. And as you know, they launched attacks against Israel, and Israel responded back into Yemen in response to that. But they have a capability. And then there's, of course, the Iran-backed groups that are in Iraq and Syria. One of those launched an attack on a U.S. base recently, right, and injured U.S. soldiers. So those Iranian-backed groups in Iraq and Syria certainly could be involved in attacking U.S. forces again. Remember, in the past, it wasn't many months ago, when they were doing that on a somewhat regular basis. And then the other thing that can happen, of course, is Hezbollah. And Lebanese Hezbollah, which is very much been supported and is an absolute proxy of Iran, exists. As you know, that's where the leader from Gaza was in that area when he was, that attack was done there. I mean, not a Gaza leader. That Hezbollah leader was taken out in Lebanon. So they could bring a tremendous arsenal of missiles and drones, and much more accurate than what have been used by like the Houthis and others. They have a much bigger arsenal. They could all be in the trick bag. So could other terrorist acts across the region that they would take all time to unfold. That's what they could do. Whether they will do that, there's a lot of speculation, and like I said, I don't have the crystal ball to tell you the answer. The one thing I'll mention is I would not expect Hezbollah to expend all those weapons that they have holed up at this particular time frame. They know Israel has great intelligence, great capability, and they're poised to strike. They don't want that going on, I don't think, to risk what they've built up in terms of capability over time at this moment in time when they see Israel in a long, protracted conflict that isn't necessarily going the way that they would want.
Yeah. So if you're sitting in Tehran and you are now under some pressure to respond because A, you've said you're going to do it, B, you can't take an assassination, presumably by Israel, on your own soil without some kind of response. However, everyone from all sides seems to keep saying this is a war that no one wants. What are your options strategically, politically, from Tehran's perspective?
Well, Tehran's strength has never been the direct confrontation with its conventional forces, right? They're not a match for the United States or the United States and Israel combined or other allies combined. Their strength is in the terrorism and the proxy forces and the rest. One of their options is to say that we're going to retaliate in our way over time, right? That can be an option. It doesn't have to be. I think they are somewhat pressured in time, but they can play it up to say this isn't all we're going to do. This was just step one. We'll continue to ratchet up the pressure because you guys of what was done here most recently. That is more rational way to go, but I don't really know how they're gonna play this out with the current new leadership and everything else that's going on in Iran at this time.
Yeah. What are you looking for, Kevin, in terms of indicators and next moves? Things that would be, there's no best case scenario here unless there's obviously a cooling off all around in the Middle East, which is realistically not likely to happen. But what are the indicators that you're going to be looking for that things are escalating maybe a little faster than anyone anticipated?
Yeah. Well, I think the Iranian rhetoric is going to continue to be what it is, right? And the indicators that I would look for is several. Of course, our intelligence forces are all going to be listening very closely to what's being said in whatever channels that we can listen in on or understand that's going on, and that's number one. We'll look for a posture or movement of any kind of forces of any kind, right? That we see. We'll certainly pay attention to very closely to what Hezbollah is doing to understand if it's going to be coordinated in some way, right? If it'll be not just coming from Iran, but coordinated in that way. And I would believe it's kind of all hands on deck from an intelligence standpoint to understand. The rhetoric out of Iran, I don't think is going to change from what it is. I wouldn't use that as a barometer as to what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a very sage advice. When you're kind of looking at the headlines as they're developing rather quickly over the last week or so, what are you most worried about, or what should we be keeping clear and center on our radar as we try to better understand how quickly things are unfolding there?
Well, I would look back a little bit into how we got here, Suzanne, because I think that's really the critical piece. This isn't all about what the Israelis have done. We have to look at, from the United States standpoint, clearly there are issues in the Middle East that are in our national interests, right? Beyond Israel, right? Israel's one, and for many reasons, and I won't get into that. But there's other reasons to be involved in the Middle East, and it doesn't mean we need to always have our forces there. It was right when we decided we had to focus more on, Asia Pacific and China. But that didn't mean we had to abandon the Middle East from a leadership perspective. And hopefully what we're learning is that the region wants us there from a leadership perspective. The other nations in that region need us to join together, because this should never be United States, Israel against Iran. It should always be those that believe in the right and doing what's right in terms of international norms and such, and those that don't, right? And so what we're looked at as a leader in that regard for that, on that good side. When we leave, there's a vacuum that's created and others start to fill it. And I'll give you a real clear example. The Houthis, we've had multiple chances to tamp that down, since 2011, and we chose not to do that, not to take a leadership role with others, nations, and figure out how to deal with that. And so that's why that is borne out. And we know Iran's been supporting it now. And now look what's happened. The Russians are saying they may potentially give the Houthis weapons, right? And they've stepped in. In other places, we're seeing where China has stepped in to fill the void. They built a base in Djibouti. To be honest, it's their ships that are transiting the Red Sea more than anyone else in terms of bringing goods and supplies through. So what I would say is it probably should be a bell ringer for us to understand the importance of our leadership in the Middle East. And our leadership doesn't mean we always have to have carrier strike groups there. It just means that we have to be there to to be with our allies, with our partners, and bringing them together. And then when these things happen, we're in a much better position to head them off before they become the crisis state kind of position that we're in now. So this isn't all about Gaza, is what I was saying. Obviously, that's significant. And to be honest, many of these problems aren't going to be solved unless the solution, unless there's some end to what happens in Gaza. But that won't end everything. The Houthis don't go away if the Gaza conflict ends. Lebanese Hezbollah doesn't go away. Iran's influence doesn't go away the moment that the Gaza conflict ends.
I think that's really incredibly important perspective and context to think about when we're watching these headlines and watching the sort of tit for tat and keep hearing the words escalation. Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan, thank you so much for taking the time to help us understand this context a little bit better. Thanks for being here, and it's great to see you.
Great to see you again, Suzanne, and thanks for having me on the Cipher Brief.